He arrived at the fringe market with a pocket that felt lighter than pride and a heart that had forgotten how to hope the ring station around the dead blue moon was a squeal of loose bearings and tired neon, and the air tasted like rust filtered through old coffee, and Lost Betsy moved like a man who had been emptied out and left to dry in vacuum. And his name was Elias Ward. He had driven freight through dust storms on cobalt worlds and threaded debris, belts by hand, and the scars on his knuckles. Told the part of the story he never said out loud, he wanted one thing today, and it sounded like a lie even inside his own head. He wanted a ship the auctioneer kept his counter in a cargo container that leaned to one side, as if the years had finally talked into giving up a crowd float around it like water around a stuck rock miners and crack suit scrappers with wrists full of copper bracelets, drifters and gamblers, and one thin preacher with a sunburned nose who blessed everything that moved and everything that did not. Elias stood at the back and watched the lots roll by in a flat tone of a man who had seen too many endings, broken thrusters, crushed habitat, rings of crate of memory cores with the labels torn off and the heat scar still visible the price for each rose, and felt like a sick heartbeat. Then the screen changed and the container door rattled, and the auctioneer cleared his throat. Like a warning, one hull, said the auctioneer. Registry missing long term. Impound no. Claimants, no liens, no guarantees, buyer removes at own risk, symbolic price. One credit the crowd, laugh the way people laugh when they sense a curse in a room and want to prove it cannot touch them. A woman with a tattooed jaw said the hull would be haunted, and 3 men agreed at once because every outpost rumor needs a choir. Elias felt his pulse slow. Instead of raise something in those words, had opened a door inside him that he had kept nailed shut. Symbolic price, 1 credit. It sounded like a dare sent across space from whatever part of the universe still remembered him kindly. He raised his hand without ceremony, and the auctioneer squinted at him over a cracked lens. The preacher muttered that some miracles, wore work boots, and smelled like solvent no one else bid. No one else wanted to stand next to the thing that might carry the bad luck of a whole decade. Gavel down, said the auctioneer, and it sounded more like a shrug than a strike. Transfer complete, ownership record burned into a chip and slid across a scarred metal counter. Like a coin in a card trick, Elias took the chip and the directions and a torque bar he could barely afford, and he walked the outer rim of the ring toward a bay that had not seen a paying customer in a long time. The corridor lights stuttered and hummed, and the windows showed him the dead blue moon rolling slow beneath the station like a thought that would not end. When he reached the bay, the door panel blinked a single tired eye of green, and he palmed. The latch and the bulkhead moved with a sound like a long-held breath, finally leaving a chest of ship waited in the dark, like a sleeping animal. Not a sleek thing, not a proud thing, something between a freighter and a courier with a spine of battered plates, and a skin the color of old storms. A registry strip had peeled away and left a pale scar along the bow. Elias stood at the threshold and let his eyes adjust and felt the strange weight of quiet settle on his shoulders. He could hear the station beyond the walls, a dull thump of pumps, the hiss of recycled air. But inside the hull, the sound changed. It shaped itself into a hum he knew from a life he had not let himself visit in years. A ship hum, not dead, not yet. He climbed the ramp with care and set his boots on the deck plates, and the cold climbed into his bones. Like a careful thief, the entryway was narrow, and the paint had peeled in long curling flakes, and someone had written a name on the bulkhead and then painted over it until the letters were ghosts. He moved forward by touch and by the little light that leaked from a cracked strip above the door to the main corridor. He ran his palm along the wall and felt the uptick of the sensor waking shyly. Hello, he said without thinking, and the word clanged around the empty space and came back thinner. He smiled at himself, because a man who said hello to a hull was a man who'd been alone for too long. The cockpit door was stuck, and the manual overrides were stiff and resentful. He leaned into the torque bar, and the seal gave a sound like ice snapping on a river. The cockpit was a nest of dust and dead light. 2 chairs on rails, a canopy of panels that had learned the language of silence in the center of the floor of maintenance. Hatch had been opened once and never closed properly, and someone had used a boot heel to keep it from rattling. Elias lowered himself into the pilot chair and closed his eyes and let the shape of the controls map onto his hands. Throttle attitude trim. He had flown craft far worse than this, and lived. He had also flown better, and wished he had not. The chair creaked when he leaned back, and the whole room answered with a faint vibration that did not belong to the station outside. Power, he said softly, and the word felt like a request to a tired friend. No response came. Of course, he reached under the console until his fingers found the emergency tap. He pulled the cover and felt the spring fight him, and then give a dim breath of life rolled through the panels like a rumor gathering courage. One striplet. Then another low ballast charge built in the deck plates, and the hum grew steadier. He watched a single status square blink awake on the auxiliary screen, primary bus offline, secondary, bus degraded, backup, bus dormant. But not dead. He exhaled a breath he did not know he was holding and laughed without sound. He walked the corridors with a hand light and a mechanic patience engineering. Space at the stern with a fusion heart that had been kissed by time and not quite forgiven a galley the size of a confession, and a storage locker with a cracked faceplate on a cold suit, and a pack of cards and a neat band and narrow ladder that led down to spine a crawl space where the ship kept its oldest secrets and its newest excuses. He found the crew berths and the med alcove and the faint outline of a mural someone had drawn by fingertip on a stiff night when the ship sailed and everyone breathed. Together he found a maintenance console behind a panel the color of patience, and he coaxed it to show him a lineage manufacture date, lost in a registry merged ship class, not in standard upgrade path, eclectic modular core suspiciously overbuilt for a courier. He rubbed the stubble on his jaw and felt a slow turn of curiosity begin to pull him toward the center of the maze. The center was a sealed door with no business being sealed. He ran the light over the scenes and saw the glint of a lock he did not recognize, not corporate, not military standard, something bespoke and careful and proud. He set the light on a pipe and took the torque bar in both hands and considered the hinge pins and the leverage he could steal from the wall. He also considered the kind of person who sealed a door like this and left everything else to time. There were two kinds of secrets in space, the kind that were empty theater and the kind that were promises made to the future. He had learned to tell the difference by the way the air felt in the hall. Outside the door, this air felt held Elias. Leaned close and rested his forehead against the metal and let the hum of the ship travel into his bones. He felt the old ache in his left shoulder answer, and he smiled because old aches were honest. He said a few words under his breath that did not ask for help but did not refuse it either. Then he stepped back and set the bar and pulled with a slow, steady force that did not try to impress anyone. A lock did not move. He reset and tried a quarter turn. Nothing. He changed angle and braced his boot against a rib and pulled again and felt the tiniest give as if the lock had sighed and remembered it was part of a door and not averted. The bar slipped and he caught himself on the frame and laughed again without sound because a man arguing with a door was a man who had decided to live another day. He wiped his palms on his jacket and checked the bulkhead for a bypass. He might have missed his light, found a hairline panel almost shy enough to vanish in. He pried it open with a nail inside sat a slot the size of a dog tag and a dust print that suggested someone had once lived there and had been taken away. Keyed access then, and no key left behind. He let the panel fall closed, and he leaned back against the opposite wall and looked at the ceiling and felt the weight of a question settle in his chest. What would a man seal this? Well, the hum deepened in the floor, and a faint whisper ghosted along the corridor. It was not a voice yet, and not a fault. Either a resonance that felt like a shy wave touching a short night. Elias followed it back toward engineering and put his ear to the bulkhead where the main conduits ran. The whisper gathered shape, a stutter packets, a handshake. Trying complete through corrosion and neglect, he traced the conduit into a junction box and opened it and found a secondary line braided around the main like ivy around a beam. It led not forward and not aft, but inward toward a sealed door again by a path the schematics pretended did not exist. He closed the box and stood in the dim and felt the old navigator in him wake fully. At last, maps were not just lines on a screen. They were lies that told the truth. If you knew where to listen, he listened now, and he heard the ship telling him that someone had wanted a channel kept alive to that sealed center. Someone had fed power to it long after the main bus gave up. Someone had made sure a heartbeat would be waiting for the right hands and the right patience. He went back to the cockpit and sat down and let the chair hold him. He flexed his fingers and brought up the auxiliary again and touched the dead icons like a man laying hands on a sleeping animal. He coaxed the backup bus with a soft start and bled power in a thin trickle through an isolation path that bypassed three blackened relays. The panel flickered and steadied, and the hum under his boots smoothed into a single note. The air warmed half a breath. A small light on the co-pilot side blinked. An eye opened and closed again like a secret learning how to speak. He thought about the laugh from the crowd and the way the auctioneer had not looked at him long enough to remember his face. He thought about the places he had slept in the last handful of years and how none of them had a word like home attached. He thought about the kind of hope that does not run ahead of you waving flags, but walks beside you and keeps pace even when the day is heavy. He set his hand on the throttle and did not push it because this was not a day for Motion was a day for listening. The hum swelled, and the thread of sound wound through it like a voice warming up in an empty hall. He felt in his chest before he heard it with his ears, a presence, not a person, not yet a shape made of memory and systems, and a stubborn desire to work. He closed his eyes and let it arrive on its own terms. The auxiliary screen drew a single glyph that did not belong to any vendor or fleet. Elias knew it looked like a star with one arm missing and a circle laid over the heart of it. He opened his eyes, and the cockpit felt a fraction smaller and a fraction kinder. He did not speak, because he did not want to scare the moment away. He waited the glyph pulse once, and the hum shifted to a note that gently asked for more power, and he granted an inch, and no more the note brightened static, brushed his skin like fine dust. The co-pilot display breathed a faint pattern that could have been pure noise and could have been the beginning of language. He set both hands flat on the console and leaned forward, and he whispered a line he had not said since he was young and foolish and learned to fly on a wind-scarred world with the tower's lean ship. I am Elias Ward. I paid 1 credit for you, because I was out of anything else to believe in. If there is something inside you that still wants the sky, then you and I might have a bargain. No reply came in words. A hum rose, and steady like a hand finding yours in the dark and holding on without asking for anything. In return, a faint warmth slid along the seams of the sealed door down the corridor. He felt it as surely as if the metal had spoken. The key was not a tag and not a code. The key was patience and power, and the willingness to listen longer than was comfortable. He stood again and walked the narrow path back to the center, and when he reached the door, he laid his palm flat on it. Skin the warmth met him through the chill, and for a heartbeat he could have sworn. The metal breathed. He did not reach for the torque bar. He did not pull or pry. He simply kept his hand there and thought about every ship he had flown and every dawn he had chased, and every time a machine had trusted him more than a person had. The lock clicked like a distant pebble struck by a wave once, twice. Then the seam released a shallow sigh, and a hairline softened from shadow to line. He stepped back, and the door eased inward a finger width and stopped as if to ask whether he was sure. Elias let a slow breath out and nodded to no. One into the hull, into the part of himself that had walked here, when every other part wanted to keep moving. He set his fingers on the edge and drew the door wider until the dark within became a room, and the shape in the center became an answer. He saw the pod before he understood it, a cradle taller. Then he was built of glass and pale alloy and the faint violet that only shows up when systems have been asked to wait longer than they were. Designed, he moved closer step by quiet step, and the hand light swept across the curve and found a face inside, not the gray piece of cryo sleep, not the dust of long ago failure. A face alive and still and listening with eyes closed, as if a dream had asked for a few more minutes. His heart stumbled and then raced, and then refused to choose a speed. There was a plaque set low where a name would go if a name had been permitted. The etching had been polished away by time or by caution. Above it, a small port glowed with the slow blink of a caretaker. Circuit too stubborn to quit. He could feel the ship watching him now, not with cameras and not with sensors, with something older, with the kind of attention a house pays when it decides you might belong in it. Elias touched the cradle glass with 2 fingers, and the violet deepened like a held breath, preparing to become a word. He did not speak. He did not dare break the stillness that felt like a threshold. He stood with the hum and the warmth and the slow blink, and he understood that the bargain he had made with a symbol and a hum might be larger than he had planned. He lowered his hand and looked around the room and saw the second shape, and the third, 3 cradles in a half circle, like a sunrise that had been refused, and was now reconsidering the center. One had power, the flanking 2 did not. He looked back at the seal lock, now half ashamed of having tried to muscle it, and half grateful he had failed. Some doors only opened for certain kinds of knocking he stepped backward into. The corridor and the door did not try to close on him. He felt the slow rebuild of his breath, and the weight of decision begin to gather. To wake a thing you do not understand is a kind of violence. To leave it sleeping when the world around it is dying is another kind. He carried both truths back to the cockpit and sat and let the chair take him in, and he watched the glyph pulse its quiet star, and he waited for the hum to answer the question. He had not yet found words for far beyond. The window of the dead blue moon kept turning, and the station lights kept stuttering, and the fringe market kept selling the last stories of broken lives to the next lives ready to be broken inside the hull. A man who had run out of futures held one in his hands and listened to his ship remember how to speak. Elias woke in the cockpit chair with the low hum still moving under his boots like a pulse that refused to die. He had not meant to sleep, but exhaustion had crept in and wrapped him with the stale air of the cabin when he sat up the glyph on the panel was still there, pulsing faint and steady like the heartbeat of a hidden animal. He rubbed his eyes and whispered good morning, though no one was there to answer. He walked the corridor again, his hand like cutting pale slices across the ribs of the ship. The sealed chamber door now stood half open, waiting for him, like an unfinished sentence. Inside, the first cradle still glowed violet steady and calm, while the other two remained dark as stone Elias stood at the threshold and tried to imagine. The story of whoever lay inside the lines on a face were not of age, but a pause as if time had stopped and chosen to keep one soul for later. He searched the bulkhead for control panels and found a recessed console hidden behind a layer of dust and corrosion. When he brushed it clean, faint icons sparked like embers refusing to die. He pressed the largest, and the ship answered with a whisper through the walls, a voice not human, yet shaped like one. Designation Lyra, Auxiliary Intelligence, online. Who claims command. The voice startled him with its softness, not the bark of military AI or the hollow echo of a traitor core, but something in between a companion tone. He cleared his throat and said, Elias Ward, owner by purchase at auction. 1 credit transferred, valid registry. Token, attached to lights, and the cradle brightened a little, as if the ship itself was smiling, though no face showed it. The voice returned 1 credit for 3 lives, and a promise. Elias frowned. 3 lives. He glanced at the other 2 cradles, dark and silent. The voice confirmed affirmative. 3 passengers in long-term suspension, 2 systems dormant, 1 system active awaiting choice. The word echoed inside him, heavier than the hull itself. He asked what choice. The voice answered, simple, to awaken or to leave sleeping until condition improves. Warning, secondary pods, unstable integrity, compromised activation, risk high. Elias paced the chamber, his boots scraping against the plates. He remembered freight contracts, where 1 wrong decision meant losing oxygen for half a crew. He remembered captains who gambled lives for profit. He remembered being left behind once in a dust storm with a broken suit and no beacon. That was when he had promised himself never again to gamble with people. He stopped before the active cradle, his reflection faint in the curved glass. The face inside did not stir, yet he felt the weight of its presence like someone listening. Behind the door, he laid his hand flat against the glass and spoke, not to the ship, not to the AI, but to the figure within. I do not know your story. I only know I bought a wreck and found a family waiting. If waking you brings danger, I will still choose it, because silence is another kind of death. The glyph in the cockpit pulsed brighter down the corridor. Lyra, the voice, said, command registered. Elias Ward, do you confirm initiation sequence? His hand trembled, but he said yes. Confirm. The chamber filled with a low rising tone, and frost began to melt along the edges of the glass. The violet glow spread across the cradle, and condensation clouded the face until it vanished behind mist. Elias stepped back, heart pounding. When the mist cleared, the eyelids inside fluttered once, twice, then opened, revealing eyes that glowed faint in the dim cabin. They fixed on him not with fear, but with recognition, as if they had been waiting for him longer than he had been alive. Elias stood frozen, the hum of the ship deepening around him like applause in a cathedral of steel. The voice of Lyra whispered, passenger 1 awakening sequence, complete vital signs, with intolerance awaiting interaction. The lips of the figure moved dry and cracked, but clear enough for Elias to hear a single word. Who? And Elias realized his bargain had only just begun. The single word hung in the chamber like static caught in the air. Who? The figure inside the cradle leaned forward against restraint, skin pale, eyes wide with confusion, but not weakness. Elias answered with the only truth he had. I am Elias Ward. I bought this ship for 1 credit and found you here. The words sounded foolish as soon as he said them, yet the eyes regarded him as if weighing the measure of a coin. Lyra's voice drifted from the panels, quiet and certain. Passenger 1 identification, record missing, system corruption, 78%. Recommend verbal exchange for context. The figure struggled once, then the cradle locks released with a hiss of old hydraulics. The canopy lifting slowly like the lid of a long forgotten chest. Elias reached forward to steady them as they stepped out, their weight unsteady, but their gaze sharp. They said my name was Commander Arya, Keen Fleet Survey Corps. At least it was before the storm, before everything. Elias guided her to a bench fashioned from a storage crate and handed over a flask of water. Arya drank, as if rediscovering gravity, each swallow grounding her further. She asked bluntly, how long have I slept? Lyra answered, 326 years, 6 months, 13 days. Arya closed her eyes briefly, her shoulders rigid, and exhaled as if the number had been expected and dreaded at once. Elias crouched near her, trying to read the lines of a soldier's face drawn tight against memory. He asked what happened here. Why were you left behind? Arya shook her head. Not yet. She said, first tell me how you found Elias. Explain the auction, the laughter of the crowd. The single credit slipped across account of the walkthrough. Rust and silence until the hum had answered. Him she listened without interruption, then whispered the ship chose you, Lyra, confirmed statement correct access protocol unlocked by resonance with owner signature. Elias frowned. What does that mean? Arya looked him over, as though deciding whether to trust a stranger with the last secret she carried this vessel. She said it was not built for trade or patrol. It was built as Sanctuary, a prototype ark for frontier collapse events meant to carry families, researchers, children, whole colonies away from disaster. We launched, but never reached the rendezvous. Elias felt the way her words sink into him like iron into water. He looked toward the two dark cradles still sealed, waiting in silence, and he asked quietly. Arya's eyes shifted, her expression hard. Those are my children. The silence stretched heavy. Elias felt his throat dry. He glanced at Lyra, who said secondary pods degraded, 92% integrity, low revival risk, unacceptable without system restoration. Arya gripped the edge of the crate, her knuckles white. Bring them back, she said, her voice rough with command. Bring them back now. Elias raised his hands. Slowly, listen. We cannot rush this. If the systems fail, they could die forever. Her eyes burned with desperation, but behind it, he saw fear, the same fear he had once known, alone in a storm, abandoned with nothing but breath and stubbornness. He said softly, we will find a way together. Lyra interjected. Proposal: stabilize power grid, reroute auxiliary lines from non-essential systems, require manual labor, extensive repair. Risk moderate. Elias stood, shoulders squaring, as the shape of choice rose before him. He turned to Arya and said, if you trust me, we can make this ship breathe again. Her answer came not with words, but with a single sharp nod, the nod of commander accepting battle. That night cycle, they worked side by side, Elias with torque bar and patch lines, Arya with memory of schematics long buried in dust. Lyra guided them through junctions, whispering status updates, power levels, warnings. The ship seemed to awaken more with every hour. Lights flickered, steady conduits warmed, air grew less stale. Elias stole glances at Arya, bent over circuits, her face illuminated by the glow of a lamp, and wonder how someone could carry centuries and still stand when exhaustion finally bent his back. He sank to the deck and laughed a low, tired laugh. Arya asked what's funny. He shook his head. Nothing, except I paid one credit expecting a wreck, and instead I found you. She looked at him a long moment, then said quietly, then maybe the universe decided your luck was due. Above them, the hum deepened into something steady, almost like a heartbeat shared, and for the first time Elias realized the ship was no longer silent. It was listening, and it was waiting for what they would choose next. The hum of the ship carried to the bones of the hull, like a steady heartbeat, stronger now than it had been in centuries. Elias felt it each time his boots met the deck plates, and it gave him the strange sensation that the vessel itself was listening to every word, every breath. He and Arya shared the sealed chamber. No longer felt like a tomb. It felt like the edge of something beginning to stir. Arya stood before the two dormant cradles, her hands hovering inches from the glass, as though touch alone might awaken the children inside. She had told Elias their names, Leora and Jalen, one older, one younger, both carried into sleep. When the stars had turned against them, her eyes had the hard edge of command, but beneath it the tremor of a mother terrified. To hope Lyra's voice filled the chamber. Cool and deliberate secondary pods require stabilization, thermal regulators, offline power feed, corrupted recommendation, conduct full bypass manual, override. Needed risk remains high probability of revival, 32% with current status. Arya's jaw tightened, and Elias could see the storm behind her eyes. She said softly, 32% is not enough. Elias stepped closer. He felt the weight of her gaze shift to him, and he answered without hesitation. Then we changed the math. He pointed to conduits snaking along the walls, half rust, half miracle. If we reroute from the main plasma line, we can give the cradles cleaner current. It will burn out the old relays, but it will raise their odds. Arya studied him for a long breath. You speak like someone who has done this before. Elias gave a short, humorless smile. I have rewired more ships in desperation than I care to count. He set his hand on the cradle beside hers, and I have lost people I swore I would save. I am not ready to add two more to that list. They worked together through long hours, stripping cables, resoldering contacts, bypassing regulators. Lyra guided them with measured calm, recalculating risks. With every connection, the ship hummed louder lights, steady in the corridor. The air tasted less of rust and more of something alive. Elias could feel sweat sting his eyes as he tightened the last clamp and heard the soft whine of energy flowing clean into the cradle's veins. Arya crouched beside the first pod, her hands trembling over the manual release. She looked at Elias, her voice lower than a whisper. If this fails, I lose them twice. He crouched with her steady and calm. Then we do it together. And if they open their eyes, it will not be because luck's smile it will be, because you never gave up. Lyra announced, sequence ready awaiting confirmation. Arya inhaled, deeper fingers tightening over the release. Lever confirmed, she said, and the cradle hissed as frost melted along. It seems a glow returned, faint at first, then steadier lights chasing one another across the panel, until it pulsed like a heartbeat. The mist rolled back, revealing the small form within a boy, his chest rising, shallow eyes, closed tight areas. Cry was both command and prayer. As she pressed her hand to the glass jail and wake, Elias felt his chest tighten as the boy's eyelids fluttered, then opened, revealing eyes that blinked at the light as if waking from a long dream. He coughed weak. But alive, Arya collapsed against the cradle, tears spilling unchecked as she whispered, over. And over, you are safe, you are safe. Lyra's voice cut through stable signs, present subject, conscious probability of sustained recovery. 71%. Elias let out the breath he had been holding until his lungs burned. He looked at Arya holding her son and felt a strange warmth in his chest, but the second cradle remained dark. Arya rose, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve, and turned to it. Determination carved into every line. We are not finished. Elias heaved himself up with aching arms and set his hand beside hers together. Then the second cradle was worse, corroded, deeper circuits, burned black. Lyra warned, probability of success low. 21%. Arya closed her eyes and whispered she was older. She always protected her brother. She would want him to try. Elias set his jaw. Let's make 21 into 100. They worked faster, harsher, pulling conduits from systems that protested, stripping half the cockpit of its auxiliary feeds until the panels dimmed. The ship groaned as though straining under their choices. But Elias ignored it, sweat dripping down his neck. Arya's hands shook with fatigue, but she refused to stop, and when her strength faltered, Elias steadied her pressing tools into her palm, guided her grip. At last, the final connection sparked, and light surged to the cradle. The glass glowed too bright, then dimmed, then glowed again. Lyra said, sequence unstable, attempting stabilization. Elias barked, override, push it through. The ship's shuttered lights flickered, and then a sound filled the chamber that stole their breath, a gas from inside. The cradle mist cleared, and the face of a girl appeared, eyes closed, skin pale, but breathing shallow. Arya pressed both hands to the glass, whispering her daughter's name. Leora, wake up. Please wake up. The eyelids twitched, then opened, revealing eyes filled with confusion, and tears spilled down Arya's face as she laughed and sobbed together. Lyra reported vital signs. Fragile stabilization required, but conscious. Elias leaned against the wall, exhausted, every muscle trembling with relief. He looked at Arya kneeling between her children, both awake, both alive against impossible odds. For a long moment, he let the sight burn into his memory, the image of a family pulled back from the edge of silence. Arya turned to him, her voice breaking. Elias, Ward, you have given me back what the stars try to steal. I will not forget. She placed her hand on his shoulder, firm and warm, and in her eyes he saw not only gratitude, but trust and something deeper forming in the quiet. But the ship had not finished speaking. The cockpit alarms flickered faint at first, then louder. Lyra's voice shifted tone. Intrusion detected, external scan active, probability high. That local scavenger guild has registered power surge. Elias and Arya exchanged a look, the joy of reunion colliding with the weight of danger. Elias said flat, we bought a miracle for 1 credit, but it looks like someone else wants to collect the change. Arya rose tall and unyielding. The soldier returned to her bones. And let them come. She said, this ship has a heartbeat again, and I will not let it be stolen. The children stirred weak, but aware. Lyra's glyph pulsed bright across the panels, and Elias felt the hum rise to something sharper, more defiant. He realized in that moment they were no longer alone. He had not just bought a ship, he had stepped into a story older and larger than himself, and the story was only beginning. The alarms echoed through the corridors like a warning bell carried on steel. Elias sprinted toward the cockpit, his boots pounding on the deck plates. Arya close behind her children, safe in the chamber, with Lyra's calm voice watching over them. By the time he reached the pilot chair, the auxiliary screen was filled with red glyphs pulsing like wounds. Lyra's voice spoke, crisp, external scan. Confirmed 4 vessels approaching trajectory inbound. Vector indicates scavenger guild registration. Code masked, but pattern matches hostile intent. Elias dropped into chair, fingers flying over dead panels, bringing to life anything the ship would still give. Arya stood at his shoulder, eyes narrowing. She knew the tone of an ambush too well. This is not coincidence. Someone noticed the surge. Elias felt the hum of the ship deepen as he rerouted what little power they had into shields, and senses the glyph on the co-pilot display pulse faster, as if the ship itself was straining to wake more. Systems and Elias dared touch. He whispered, "Stay with me, old girl. Stay awake." The panels flickered grudgingly, and Lyra confirmed hull integrity, 30% defensive grid offline propulsion. Limited area's hand landed firm on his shoulder, her voice steady. "We have more than metal. We have will." And sometimes that is enough to view outside. The canopy brightened as scavenger ships dropped from drift, sleek shadows marked with jagged paint. 4 predators circling one wounded prey. The calm crackled to life with a voice sharp and amused. Well, someone's been stirring ghosts in Bay 12. Elias recognized the tone, the voice of men who believed ownership was nothing, but who held the bigger gun. "This vessel is guild property," the voice declared. "Hand it over, and maybe we let you walk away." Arya leaned forward, her voice cutting like steel. "You will try, and you will fail. This ship is not yours." There was silence, and laughter cold and sure. Elias muted the channel and looked at her. "You just painted a target on us." She smiled without humor. "They already had us marked. Better to remind them. We are not afraid." Lyra spoke, new tone, urgent, multiple grapples. "Preparing launch. Recommend evasive action." Elias slammed the manual controls, his hand steady. As he forced life into thrusters, half asleep, the ship groaned, but moved, slipping sideways as magnetic harpoons fired across the gap and clanged against the bulkhead just short. He shouted back at the ship, "Come on, one more step." The thrusters caught, and they rolled out of the trap, sparks flying from overstressed panels. Arya strapped into the co-pilot chair, grabbing secondary controls, her voice clipped orders. "Elias, I fly with you, not behind you." He shot her a quick grin, tight formation dive toward the moon. "Keep their sensors guessing." The ship dove, its old bones screaming, but alive. Scavenger ships twisting pursue, beams of light streaking past the canopy. Elias rolled the hull sideways, just enough to slip between two bolts, one sparking across the shield and rattling the frame in the chamber. Lyra whispered to the children, "Do not fear. This sound is not the sound of death. It is the sound of guardians fighting for you." Leora and Jalen clung to each other, eyes wide, but listening, breathing steady, as if the AI's voice was anchor enough. Back in the cockpit, Arya pointed to a flashing sector on the console. "That conduit is overloading. If it burns, we lose maneuvering." Elias cursed under his breath, "I can vent it, but we lose half thrust." Arya shook her head. "Not an option. Reroute through dorsal lines." Now Elias hesitated. Lyra calculated probability of success, 29%. Arya's voice rose firm and unyielding. "Do it." Elias slammed command, and the ship jolted, sparks raining overhead, but the thrust steadied, power bleeding through systems not used in centuries. The hum roared back strong. One scavenger ship drew two close-firing harpoons again. Elias rolled hard, dragging the hull across their bow, the impact shattering half their array. The Predator spun out, sparks trailing into the void. Arya barked, "One down, 3 to go." Elias felt adrenaline burn through exhaustion, his hand steady as stone. "This ship is not done yet." The remaining 3 tightened their circle, weapons charging bright. Arya cursed under her breath, "They will burn us down unless we show teeth." Elias leaned forward, teeth clenched. "Lyra, what do we have left?" Lyra answered faint, but determined. "Prototype weapon systems. Dormant design, concealed probability of activation if power redirected high, but risk catastrophic." Elias laughed once rough and fearless. "Sounds perfect. Do it." Arya looked at him. "Are you insane?" He grinned. "Insanity. Bought this ship for a credit, and it is the only thing keeping us alive." Lyra's glyph pulsed brilliant, the hum rising until the deck shook, panels lit that had not glowed in centuries, and along the spine of the ship plates folded back, revealing a weapon array humming with violet light. The scavenger guild voices crackled in alarm. "What the hell is that?" Elias pushed the firing command, and the ship answered with a lance of energy that carved the void, striking one vessel clean through its core. The explosion lit the moon's surface in ghostly glow. Arya stared, wide eyes alive with fire. "What did you just unleash?" Elias exhaled slow, something worth more than all their credits put together. The last 2 ships broke formation, one fleeing, the other firing wildly in panic, beams slashing across empty space. Elias twisted the controls, pressing the ship into one last dive, the violet array charging again. He shouted, "Hold together, old girl. Just one more time." The second shot toward the last scavenger vessel, part fragments scattering into orbit, leaving silence thick in their wake. The cockpit trembled, then steadied. Lyra's voice, softer. "Primary weapon array unstable, shutting down for system protection. Probability of reuse minimal." Elias leaned back, sweat dripping down his brow, his chest heaving with each breath. Arya unclipped her harness, eyes still locked on him. "You just made enemies we cannot measure." He met her gaze steady. "Then let them come. They will learn this ship has a heart, and it is not for sale." In the chamber, Leora and Jalen peeked out, wide-eyed, their mother rushing to them, holding them both tight, her tears falling on their hair. She whispered, "Over and over, you are safe. Because someone believed when no one else did, Elias watched from the doorway, feeling the ache of old loneliness begin to ease. He had bought a wreck for a single credit, but what he truly bought was a chance to belong again. Lyra's voice floated gentle across the room. Elias ward Arya keen, 2 children. Aboard trajectory, uncertain. But path open. What are your orders? Elias closed his eyes for a long breath, and when he opened them, he smiled for first time in years. We fly not to run, but to live. And the ship hummed louder than ever, as if answering. Yes, the wreckage of the scavenger vessels still drifted in orbit around the dead blue moon like shattered bones reflecting faint starlight. Elias guided the ship through the debris with careful precision, each movement cautious. Yet steady. Arya stood at the co-pilot station, watching sensors for any sign of more enemies or hand, never far from the controls, though her eyes shifted often toward the chamber, where her children now rested wrapped in blankets, and protected by Lyra's constant watch. To hum the ship no longer felt like a whisper. It had grown into a steady rhythm, alive with purpose. Elias could sense it under every step, as if the vessel itself had been waiting all these years for hands willing to fight for it. He muttered almost to himself, "You were never a wreck, were you? You were just waiting for someone stubborn enough to listen." Lyra's voice answered calm, yet edged with something like pride. This vessel was designed as sanctuary, prototype designation Seraphim Arc, created to preserve life during frontier collapse, scenario status mission, incomplete primary. Passengers lost, secondary passengers, preserved function stable. Until awakening, Elias leaned back in the chair, letting the words sink in. Sanctuary Arc, the phrase itself, carried weight. Area's face hardened. Her children were not just random survivors. They were part of a design, a secret mission hidden away. Elias asked flatly, "How many passengers?" Originally, Lyra paused. Long primary manifest. Corrupted estimated count 412 survivors. Stasis pods 98% destroyed. During catastrophic event, only 3 remained stable. Arya closed her eyes, her jaw trembling. She whispered, "They entrusted us with hundreds, and we saved only 3. Elias watched her shoulders tighten, and he felt the weight of guilt press into the room. He said gently, "That is not your failure, Arya. You held on to what you could sometimes. Survival means carrying even a fragment forward. That fragment is enough to rebuild." Arya turned to her eyes fierce. "I will not let their memory end in silence. If the ship still carries what they built, then we must protect it with everything we are." Elias nodded, and for the first time he realized he was no longer drifting alone. He had found a mission larger than himself. Lyra interrupted transmission, detected long-range scan, inbound signal, origin corporate authority, designation Black Star, holdings probability high. That recent weapons activation flag system wide interest. Arya cursed under her breath. "They will come with fleets, not scavengers. Black Star does not ignore relics that can cut a warship in half." Elias leaned forward, his voice steady. "Then we prepare." He tapped the console. "Show me everything this ship still has left." The hours turned into cycles. Elias and Arya worked together, tracing conduits, opening compartments. Long sealed. The ship revealed itself layer by layer. Hidden weapon arrays, dormant shield projectors folded like sleeping wings. Engines that had not burned in centuries, but still carried the potential of light. Lyra guided them with precision, mapping strengths and weaknesses. Elias patched circuits with hands steady from years of desperate repairs. Arya trained her children in small ways, teaching them to read displays, to understand the meaning of alarms. Their eyes bright with resilience at night. Cycle. They gathered in the Gallia place that had once served hundreds, now lit only by a single panel. Arya told her children stories of the frontier days, when humanity still believed every star could be home. Elias listened quietly, drinking in the sound of belonging he had missed for too long. He noticed the way Leora leaned against her mother, the way Jalen asked endless questions, and he realized he wanted to protect that light more than anything. Days later, Lyra's voice sharpened. Incoming vessels, identified corporate scout frigates, estimated arrival time 12 hours. Elias and Arya exchanged a look, no words needed. They knew this would be the true test. Arya said firmly, "We cannot fight a fleet, not yet, but we can run." She turned to Elias, her voice lower. "You are the pilot, do you trust these engines to wake after centuries?" Elias smiled. Crooked trust, no, but I believe in stubborn machines as much as stubborn people. Let's see if she wants the sky. They raced through preparations, rerouting every scrap of power into propulsion systems. Lyra singing status reports like a choir in the background. The children carried tools, fetch panels, eyes wide, but determined. Arya never left Elias's side as they primed the ancient heart of the Seraphim Arc. The moment came. Elias gripped the throttle. Arya braced at her station. Lyra's glyph blazed bright, initiating ignition sequence. Engines awakening. Standby. The hum grew into a roar. deep to the hull of the floor shaking, as light surged through conduits that had been dark for centuries and will lurch that rattle-teeth the ship tore itself free of the station's gravity. Well, engines blazing, violet fire, Elias shouted, half laugh, half cry. She flies, Arya gripped her seat, eyes wide with awe. Leora and Jalen press against the canopy, watching Starstreak as the ship leapt forward faster than any freighter Elias had ever touched. Behind them, sensors screamed, multiple frigates emerging from drifter shadows, filling the void. Blackstar had arrived faster than expected, their formation tight, their weapons primed. Lyra's voice calm. Alert pursuit vessels, lock probability of interception high. Recommend evasive action. Elias bared his teeth. Bring it on the Seraphim Arc Dove. Through asteroid fields, engines blazing shields. Flickering sparks trailing off the hull. Arya fired dormant arrays, now sputtering back to life. Blasts of violet light scattering debris into clouds that blinded the pursuers. The children clung to harness straps, their eyes wide with terror and wonder. Through it all, Elias felt something grow inside him, a fire he thought long extinguished. He had bought a wreck for one credit, but what he truly held was a miracle of family and a chance to carve a path that mattered. The ship was alive, the children were. Awake, Arya was at his side, and for the first time in years, the future did not feel like an empty corridor, but the Black Star frigates were relentless, closing distance, weapons charging brighter than stars. Lyra's voice sharpened, warning impact probability. Rising, Elias gripped the throttle, his voice steady. Then we do what we always do when the universe tries to crush us. We keep flying, and the Seraphim Arc roared defiant against the night. The void around them burned with the light of pursuit. Black Star frigates cut through the dark like knives, their engines flaring cold blue against the shadow of the dead moon. Elias felt every thrum of the Ark's ancient engines beneath his boots, each vibration a reminder that this vessel had not flown in centuries, and yet still carried them forward faster than it had any right to. Arya's voice snapped over the roar of alarm shields at 20% and dropping evasive pattern delta. Elias rolled the ship hard, banking to a jagged field of shattered rock fragments from some forgotten collision centuries old. The Ark groaned, beheld sliding between stone walls that would have ripped a lesser craft to ribbons. Lasers slashed the field, carving molten scars into rock. Just meters from their hull, Lyra's voice echoed steady system stress. At 60% probability of catastrophic failure, rising, recommend disengagement. Elias barked back, not an option. Not while they're on our tail. Aria's hand flew over controls, priming what remained of the prototype arrays. Energy crackled. Faint violet along the dorsal plates, but sputtered before reaching full charge. She cursed under her breath. We cannot outgun them. Not yet. In the galley turned shelter. Leora and Jalen clung to safety straps, their eyes wide. Lyra projected a calming voice. They're telling the ship is what you trust. A hum trust the guardians. Jalen whispered, is Mom going to win? Leora held his hand tightly and said, she already is. We are alive. Elias pulled the Ark into a spiral dive, engines howling as he forced power through bypasses not meant to carry the load. The frigates followed relentless, closing distance with precision. A blast rocked the hull, shields flaring and dying panels across the cockpit. When dark, Lyra warned hull integrity compromised. In Sector 9, Arya shouted, sealing bulkheads, and the ship groaned again as compartments closed with heavy thuds. Elias grit his teeth. We need more than running. We need a trick. Arya's eyes flashed. There might be one. The prototype drives have a hidden vector. Jump function, short range, unstable. She pointed at the console. If we overload them, we can rip forward just enough to break pursuit, but we risk tearing ourselves apart. Elias laughed sharp and breathless. Risk. And I have been married for years. Let's do it. Lyra interjected caution. Advised probability of survival, 34%. Elias grinned. 34 is better than 0. Arya met his eyes steady. If we do this, we commit together. He nodded. Always they primed the drives, energy surging brighter. Then before the deck shaking, as if the ship itself trembled at what was being asked to do, Lyra's glyph pulsed like a heartbeat, rising faster, until the cockpit was filled with light. Elias shouted now, and slammed the throttle forward. The Seraphim Arc screamed to the void. Violet fire, exploding from its core. Space itself seemed to bend around them, stars stretching, then snapping back as the ship tore across the field. The Black Star frigates stumbled behind sensors, scrambling, unable to match the sudden burst. When the Ark emerged on the far side of the debris cloud, silence followed for a breath, then laughter rolled out. Elias's chest raw and triumphant. We are still here. Arya sagged back in her chair, eyes blazing with fierce relief that was insane. Elias grinned, and it worked. Lyra confirmed pursuit vessels, delayed, recalculating probability of re-interception, moderate time window 8 hours. Elias nodded. Good enough. We use Yet they coasted into the shadow of a massive asteroid. Hollowed by centuries of natural erosion, Elias guided the Ark into the cavern, engines dimming, until the glow faded the silence of hiding wrapped around them the hum of the ship, lowering to a whisper. In the chamber, Arya gathered her children, both trembling, but alive. She held them close, whispering, "You are safe, because we fight together." Leora looked up at her, then at Elias, standing in the doorway, and said simply, "He is family," to Arya. Met Elias's eyes, and for once did not look away that night cycle. If time could be called such an hollow of rock, they sat together in the dim galley, Elias repairing panels with calloused hands, Arya watching her children drift into sleep, Lyra's voice soft as a lullaby humming to the hull of the ship. Was not only machine, it was home. Arya broke the quiet. "Elias, you could have walked away back at the auction. No one would have blamed you." He shrugged, smiling faint. "I think this ship chose me before I ever chose it." She studied him for a long moment, then said, "Maybe it chose us both, but their moment of fragile peace did not last." Lyra's tone sharp. An external relay intercept detected. Encrypted Blackstar code. "They know where we are. Pursuit fleet size. Increased estimated arrival 12 hours." Elias and Arya exchanged a look heavy with the truth. This was no longer scavengers. This was war. Elias tightened the last bolt on the panel, stood, and says jaw, "Then we do what families do. We hold the line." Arya rose beside him, her eyes steady as steel. "And we make." Sure, the stars remembered. The Ark hummed louder in agreement, as though preparing itself for the storm to come. The asteroid cavern trembled faintly as the Seraphim Ark powered up its dormant systems one by one, the hull groaning with age, yet answering with the resolve of something that refused to be forgotten. Elias stood at the pilot's chair, his hand resting on the throttle, eyes fixed on the data streaming across a cracked display. Arya moved beside him, strapping into the co-pilot's seat, her posture taut, her face sharp with the calm of someone who had seen war before. Lyra's voice filled the silence, steady and precise. "Enemy fleet. Confirmed 6 vessels, 4 frigates, 1 cruiser. 1 carrier. Probability of direct confrontation survival. Less than 15% recommend alternative strategy." Elias muttered under his breath, 15% is more than 0. Arya shot him a look sharp and unimpressed. "I am not in the mood for your gambling metaphors, Elias. We cannot meet a carrier head on even. With this ship." She leaned closer to the display. "Show us what else we have." Lyra, the glyph pulsed brighter across the co-pilot panel, accessing hidden systems prototype. Core unlocked memory fragments. Restore warning, some files corrupted. Elias frowned. "Memory fragments." Lyra clarified, "This vessel was designed with more than sanctuary protocols, experimental armament systems, hidden at construction, commander access only." Elias glanced at Arya, and she stiffened, a flicker of recognition crossing her eyes. "Arya, what do you know about this?" She hesitated, jaw tight, then exhaled when she saw his stare. "I was Fleet Survey Corps," she said, low voice rough. "But I was second to the program that birthed this ship. We were told it was a lifeboat project for Frontier collapse. I believed it. Then I found documents buried deep in sealed channels. The Seraphim Ark was not just a sanctuary. It was also a weapon platform hidden beneath the guise of rescue." She looked down at her hands, trembling slightly. "I argued against it. I tried to stop it. And when I could not, I sealed the pods and prayed someone would remember the people, not the weapon." The cockpit fell silent, except for the steady hum. Elias felt anger rise, not at her, but at the design, the arrogance of those who twisted survival into war. He said quietly, "And now Blackstar knows what it carries." Arya nodded, grim. "That carrier is not here for salvage. It is here to claim the weapon and erase anyone who stands in the way." Lyra spoke again, calm yet edged, with something almost human integrity. "Of memory core compromise, but fragments reveal one last protocol activation. Requires human command with full trust bond." Elias frowned. "Trust bond." Lyra confirmed command recognition between designated commander and chosen pilot. 2 signatures required. Arya met his gaze, steady and fierce. Then as us, they moved the ship, following Lyra's guidance into sections they had never seen, hidden compartments sealed under. Bulkheads they pried open with sweat and stubbornness. Inside they found systems gleaming faintly despite centuries. Plasma conduits coiled like sleeping serpents, shield projectors folded tight, weapon arrays etched with designs not listed in any registry. Elias felt awe and dread all at once. He whispered, "This is not a ship, it is a fortress." When they returned to the cockpit area, his children were waiting. Leora's eyes wide, Jalen clutching her arm. "Mom, what is happening?" Arya crouched before them, voice soft but steady. "The stars are bringing a storm, and we must fight to keep each other safe. But listen to me, you are not passengers anymore. You are crew. You will help us." Jalen straightened, nodding fiercely. Leora whispered, "I am afraid." Arya brushed her cheek. So am I, but courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to stand anyway. Hours passed, as they prepared rerouting powers, sealing breaches, priming weapons. They had never tested. Elias worked until his hands bled, patching conduits with pieces stripped from forgotten compartments. Arya trained her children in emergency drills. Lyra's voice a constant presence, measuring probability, adjusting projections, recalculating paths. At last the sensor screamed enemy fleet arrival imminent. 6 vessels, inbound ETA. 20 minutes. Elias sank into pilot chair, hand steady. Arya took her place beside him, her eyes blazing. Leora and Jalen strapped into auxiliary seats, ready to assist. Lyra's glyph pulsed brighter than ever. Commander and pilot. Signatures confirmed. Activation protocol ready. Elias swallowed this. Is it Arya? He looked at her and for the first time let her see the weight he carried. If we fall, at least we fall as something greater than what they think we're. Arya reached across and clasped his hand firm, steady, always greater together. Then they turned back to the void. The Seraphim arc roared as power surged through every vein, weapons unfolding, shields blazing bright violet. Across its hull the Black Star fleet emerged from drift, weapons hot, sensors locked the carriers. Voice echoed over calm, surrender the vessel and live, resist and be erased. Elias grinned, sharp and reckless. He cut the channel and whispered to Arya, guess they will have to try. And as the first shots lit the darkness, the Seraphim arc answered, not as a relic, not as a wreck, but as something alive, a sanctuary reborn to a fortress, ready to carve its story across the stars. The first salvo struck like thunder across the void, beams of energy tearing through the asteroid field, shards of stone spinning like shrapnel in the dark. Elias rolled the Seraphim arc hard, thrusters screaming, the ancient hull answering with a roar of violet fire. Arya braced at the co-pilot seat, her eyes locked on the targeting array, hands moving with the memory of the soldier who had fought too many battles and lived to regret them. Lyra's voice filled the cockpit calm, but edged with urgency. Shield strength 72%, weapon arrays fully charged, recommend counterstrike. Elias gritted his teeth and shoved the throttle forward. The arc surged ahead, engines burning like a storm breaking free. Arya's voice cut sharp, target the lead frigate, focus fire. Elias nodded, already twisting the controls as violet light gathered along the dorsal plates. The blast ripped through the dark, a spear of energy that struck the frigate amidships, tearing it apart in a bloom of fire, and silenced. The children strapped into auxiliary seats watched with wide eyes. Jalen clutching the armrest, whispering they are actually winning. Leora shook her head, not yet, look more. Are coming. The cruiser loomed, massive weapons glowing bright, a predator circling prey. Elias pulled the arc into a dive, skimming close to the rock's beam, slashing overhead. Arya primed secondary batteries, her voice steady fire. Now 2 bursts ripped free, striking the cruiser's shield, sparks scattering across its hull. The carrier behind them unleashed a storm of drones swarming like locusts, hundreds of small machines armed with cutting lasers and explosive tips. Lyra warned multiple hostiles. Approaching probability of hull breach critical. Elias slammed the thrusters, twisting the arc into a barrel roll to the swarm. Violet light lancing out from auto turrets, awakening from centuries of silence. Drones exploded in showers of metal fragments, some crashing against the hull with bone-rattling impacts. Arya's children clung to their harnesses, eyes wide, as alarms screamed in engineering compartments, bulkheads, strained systems. Overloaded lights flickered, and Lyra's voice wavered for the first time. System stability at 30%, recommend retreat. Elias shouted back, not an option. Arya leaned forward, her jaw set. This carrier is not here for salvage. It is here to erase us. If we run, they will hunt us to the ends of the frontier. Elias glanced at her, seeing not just a commander, but a mother who had sworn never to let her children be taken again. He nodded. Then we end here. Lyra pulse brighter, core weapon. Array available, experimental system. Requires dual authorization, risk. Catastrophic. Elias and Arya locked eyes, both knowing this was a final card. They clasped hands across the console and spoke together. Do it. The ship answered with a scream of power, energy surging violet, and white spilling across the hull. Hum turned into a roar, shaking every plate, every conduit. The swarm of drones disintegrated in waves, blasted apart by shock. Pulses to frigates, faltered shields breaking under the storm. The cruiser reeled, its bow cracking, open fire spilling from its spine. But the carrier still advanced, its shadow vast, weapons charging bright enough to rival a star. Lyra's voice strained, core weapon array, unstable probability of containment. Low. Elias whispered, then we burn brighter than them all. He gripped the controls, guiding the arc straight toward the heart of the carrier. Arya's hand steady beside his targeting systems. Screaming, the children cried out, Mom. Elias. But Arya's voice was calm. Courage, my love's courage. The arc unleashed its final strike, a beam of Violet energy that tore through the void, ripping into the carrier's core light, swallowed the stars for a breathless eternity, and then silence when vision returned. Fragments of the carrier drifted broken across the black, its fire fading into ash. The remaining frigates fled, scattered into drift. Elias, slumped against the chair, chest heaving, every muscle trembling. Arya leaned back, her face pale, but her eyes burning with fierce light. Lyra's voice quiet, but steady. Hostile fleet, destroyed system. Stability critical power reserves exhausted. Elias turned his head toward Arya and managed a crooked grin. Guess that is one way to make an introduction. She let out a short laugh. Raw and relieved. You are impossible. He shrugged. Maybe, but we are alive. Behind him, the children, unstrapped, rushing into their mother's arms, holding her tight. Arya whispered, you are safe. Because we stood together. Elias watched them for a long breath, then let his head fall back against the chair, his heart heavy but steady. The Seraphim arc drifted, scarred but unbeaten. Its hum now a whisper more fragile than before, but still alive, and in that silence Elias knew the battle had not just saved them, it had carved a legend into the stars, a story of a wreck bought for a single credit that defied a fleet and lived. And yet he felt the truth settle deep inside. The fight was not over, not yet. The Seraphim arc drifted to the void, its hull scarred, its shields cracked, its engines whispering in tired rhythm, but alive. Elias sat at the pilot's chair, his hand still on the controls of the battle had ended. Arya stood beside him, her eyes scanning the displays, though most were dark, burned out from the overload. Lyra's glyph pulse faint, but steady across the panel, like the heartbeat of a tired but unbroken warrior. Leora and Jalen clung to their mother, their faces pale from fear, but their eyes shining with all they had watched their home, their sanctuary fight like a living giant, and they had seen their family stand together against the storm. Arya kissed their hair, whispering, you are safe now. No one will take that from us again. Lyra's voice rose, gentle though weaker than before. Power reserves at 5%. Systems critical. Recommend immediate restoration protocols. Elias leaned back in the chair, exhausted, but smiling. Well, old girl, you earned your rest. Arya set a hand on his shoulder, steady, firm. We will rebuild her together. For days they drifted in silence, hidden among the broken fragments of the Black Star fleet, patching what they could, rationing power. Elias worked with grease on his hands and stubborn fire in his chest. Arya oversaw every system like a commander returned to her post, and the children helped, carrying tools, fetching water, learning what it meant to live on a ship that breathed because they believed in it. At last Lyra's glyph, bright and faint, but determined, main system stabilized, propulsion at minimum capacity. Sanctuary arc ready for travel. Arya exhaled deep relief. Elias grinned. Let's find a new horizon. Then they set a course, not for war, not for empire, but for quiet edge of the frontier where stars burned lonely and unclaimed. The ark moved slow, but steady, its engines singing low as if savoring each breath of freedom. Nights blurred into weeks. They shared meals in a galley, told stories by the dim glow of a single panel. Leora drew constellations on scraps of paper and taped them to the bulkheads. Jalen asked endless questions about flying, and Elias taught him each answer with patience. Arya watched them with quiet joy, her eyes often meeting Elias's across the table. Unspoken gratitude and something warmer passing between them. One night when the children slept, Arya sat beside Elias in the cockpit, the stars stretching endless ahead. She said softly, I thought I had lost everything, my crew, my mission, my family. And then I opened my eyes to find you. Elias turned to her, his voice rough with truth. And I thought I was done with hope until this ship gave me back a reason. Arya smiled, faint and tired but real. Maybe we were both waiting, and maybe the ship knew. Lyra's voice whispered across the panel's destination approaches, uncharted system, multiple habitable signals, probability of safe refuge high. Elias grinned at Arya. What do you think? Shall we make it home? She squeezed his hand firmly. Yes, a place not just to survive, but to live. The ark descended into orbit of a green-blue world, untouched by war. Rivers glimmering beneath the sun, mountains rising sharp and proud. The children pressed their faces to the canopy, gasping with wonder. Elias guided the ship down gentle, letting it rest upon a wide valley. The hum quieting into peace. They stepped onto the soil together. Elias, Arya, Leora, Jalen, and the ship itself humming faint behind them. Arya knelt, brushing her fingers through the grass, whispering, this is ours, no one else's. Jalen laughed, running forward. Leora chasing after him. Elias stood beside Arya, the weight of years falling from his shoulders. She looked at him, eyes bright with something more than gratitude, and for once neither spoke, because the silence itself was enough. Lyra's voice drifted across the valley, carried by the ship's calm, as though blessing the moment. Sanctuary protocol complete, new home established, passengers safe, mission continues. Elias closed his eyes and let the words settle like stone in his chest. They had bought a wreck for one credit, but what they found was more than steel, more than weapons, more than a forgotten past they had found family, they had found purpose. And they had found a home, and in the quiet hum of the Seraphim Ark, they knew the story would live forever, carved not into records or ledgers, but into the hearts of those who chose to stand. When the universe tried to break them, the ship breathed, a family laughed, and the stars bore witness to the truth that one credit had bought everything that truly mattered.